most of us live a fair amount of our lives very much outside of ourselves, or you could say disconnected from ourselves. And you may ask, well, how can we be outside of ourselves? And I certainly don't mean literally. Of course, you're in your mind and your body, but experientially, a lot of the Dharma is really retraining ourselves, because we can so easily and so often become engrossed in or just immersed in whatever is happening, the experience, or this, whatever conditions or circumstances are happening. Our entire consciousness can be caught up in that, or entangled in that, involved in that, to the extent that we lose the sense of connection with ourselves. We might not notice what's going on in our own hearts and our minds, or in our own bodies. And the problem with that is that then we are liable to be completely at the mercy of, at the effect of whatever's happening. When we're entangled in something and it's something we like, we're joyful. When it's difficult, we despair, or we feel stress. And so that's one of the reasons why in traditional Dharma teachings, a lot of emphasis is put on refuge. And the traditional way that refuge is talked about is this idea of the triple gem, meaning the three refuges. They're considered precious, that's why they're called the gems: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And a lot of emphasis and time is put on reflecting on them, bringing them to mind, keeping them to mind as refuges. So I want to spend a little time on this concept of refuge, but expand it, maybe speak about it in a way not necessarily using the traditional three terms, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, although I think what I'm going to say very much fits in that framework, but just to articulate it in a different way. What's of essence and what's important is we all need, I guess I would say, a reliable refuge. And well, we can live one of two ways. We can live outside of ourselves, or we can live connected with ourselves. And part of developing, cultivating the ability of our minds to be more steady, our hearts to be more open, is to strengthen those qualities so that they're more prominent, more naturally available to us in our consciousness as forces to keep bringing us back into ourselves. It's one of the reasons why mindfulness of the body is spoken about often. There's a lot of benefits on that, and perhaps I'll do a whole talk on that at some point. But of the many benefits, one is because when the awareness is connected in the body, there's something very immediate and alive, and our experience of the body can be mediated through our perceptions. But we can drop that and just come directly unmediated experientially, and it brings us right into just the raw experiential reality of what's happening. So that's one way to think about then the body actually as a reliable refuge. It may not always feel like a refuge when it's not acting in ways that we want, but then that's a whole other piece of getting pulled out away from some sense of inner stability and caught up in what we like or don't like. This just takes us out of ourselves. So what does this mean about having a reliable refuge? Something that can support us, especially when times are difficult. we have a retreat coming up, online retreat coming up in a few weeks, and there's a theme to it, which is finding freedom in challenging times. And I think that's a nice theme and uh, something I can relate to. And it's a little odd in that we need, the real question from Dharma is um, finding freedom in the human condition. And that's not just difficult, challenging times, but in all times. What does it mean to find freedom? We've spoken about it here in this group, so I don't want to get into that too much. It's a big, big topic of, from a Dharma perspective, what do we mean by freedom? But a simple way to think of it is, how can we live and be in a way that, well, I like the Haridas quote that some of you have heard many times. Um, I wish I had my quote book here, I would read it. But he basically brings up the point that, as he's not criticizing anyone, but just as human beings, we all, at some time or another, we get caught up in worry, stress, anxiety, difficulties. And he says, when we really pay attention to what's going on in our minds, in fact, we're never really at peace. There's always something to worry about. And so that's an interesting proposition. And I view that as being intriguing. And when I hear Haridas speak like that, it makes me want to stop and check and say, well, is that really true? Let me do the experiment and pay attention to what's going on in my mind and notice what percentage of the time, do I rest at peace, in a state of equanimity with an open heart and a quiet mind? And what percentage of the time is consumed with my thoughts, some version of, I'm not okay, or I'm not going to be okay, or how am I going to be okay, or how am I going to avoid this, and strategizing and taking some stance in relationship to things, and not just resting at peace, letting things be. And when I look at my own mind, that's a fair amount. It's gotten lots better over the years and continues to get better. And I'm very pleased with the fruits of Dharma practice, as I know many of you are. I see some of you who I've known for a long time online here right now. And I know many people find tremendous fruits in the practice. So things get better. But we can all relate, I think, to, I don't know of anyone who would say they couldn't relate to what Haridas is pointing towards. And he goes on to say, ordinary life is really a constant dilemma. And then he says the purpose of, he didn't practice and teach in a Buddhist tradition. He came out of India in one of the Ashtanga yoga traditions. But he said the purpose of spirituality in any of the forms, his take on it is to, rather than live from the point of view of dilemma, to live as free, conscious, and loving beings. And I love that formulation. It's kind of a pith kind of summation to me. You know, I'm signing up for that. I want to learn how to live as a free, conscious, and loving being. So part of that, you have your own ways of articulating your own path and goals. But part of that then is what's going to support me. And a big piece of that is knowing what is a refuge, what is a reliable refuge. And if we think spending our time trying to make life be the way we want it is a reliable refuge, we're in for a rude awakening. Probably most of us here have already realized that. The problem is we don't stop living our lives as if it weren't true, because the habit of mind is ingrained and deep and is strong. So we need to cultivate certain qualities that strengthen the more reliable refuge. And so the online retreat, the Finding Freedom in Challenging Times, that is the basic theme that I'm going to say a little more tonight, but that is really what the whole retreat's going to be about. It's going to be a regular retreat focusing on cultivating the ability of the mind to settle, the ability of the heart to stay open, awareness to be mindfulness to strengthen. But then we're going to do the practices, but then really spend a lot of time exploring and talking about how each of those come and can really be a refuge, be a support for us, so we live out of those places more in difficult times, and we're not thrashing around desperately trying to get our footing, or we don't get overwhelmed so much. We're able to ride the ups and downs much more easily. And when we, in Buddhist practice, when we talk about equanimity, it's often talked about, it's called equanimity of feeling, which means the ups and downs tend to smooth out. It doesn't mean we become numb. Quite the opposite. We become very alive and awake, and there's the immediacy of just our own being is very alive in our existence, in our minds, in our awareness. It tends to be, I have to be a little careful, I don't know if this is true for everyone, but it can feel subtler than the thrills of the highs and the lows, but it's actually more deeply satisfying and more reliable. So that's one kind of equanimity, but the other equanimity is we're able to ride the highs and lows, even when they're quite strong, and not being overwhelmed. A perfect example is, I'm not a great skier, but I do ski a little bit. Sometimes in the winter, once or twice, I'll go up to Lake Tahoe area and ski. And you know, that darn meditation, it just ruins everything. Because I get up there, it's beautiful, I'm going to go skiing, rushing down the mountain. But when your mind is still, the thrill on skiing is that your mind gets pulled into the action. This is exactly, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but when I talked about being drawn out of ourselves, you're in the rush of the experience and it's exhilarating. When your mind is still, that doesn't happen. Your mind is still and body sensations are flowing past. The visuals, it's all just happening, but the mind is still. And I remember saying to my wife once, I said, well, that just killed skiing. This meditation, it just, but being a little humorous, but it kind of, and my whole family talked about it, even my 12-year-old, I spoke to him, he loved skiing, and we were having a conversation. He goes, well, you know, it is kind of like that. You're just going down the hill, and, you know, he's quite wise for a young kid. He says, you know, Dad, I always think I'm going to get something and it's just going to make me just go in this tremendous happiness. And then when you get it, you've just got it, and it's just what's happening. This is a 12-year-old kid. And I feel the same as I did before, but I'm just not craving after I don't think he used that word, but I'm just not desiring or whatever it was. So it's a relief to not be yearning for, that's actually the whole Four Noble Truths right there, right? The ending of craving. I thought, you know, dang, it's like, what? It took me 50 years to get that. Here's this kid. So he still has some work to do, don't get me wrong. But it can be like that. So, but the skiing analogies is a good one because, and of course you'll have your own experience of skiing or whatever you do. But what I found is because I'm not a great skier, I'm a decent skier. I'm a good enough skier that if I haven't skied for a whole season, or sometimes I'll go a few years and not go. When I first get on the slopes, I'm a little rusty, but within half a day or a day, and certainly by the next day, if I've skied, I've sort of gotten my ski legs are back, and I'm in about as good a form as I get. And I can ski. My most comfort is the advanced intermediate or the easy advanced. The advanced, they call them black diamonds. I can do this. So that's my kind of sweet spot. What I find is that when I'm not used to it, it scares me. You know, people are zooming down the hill, but their set point of what they're used to is different. And I find as as I get more and more used to it, I can take more bumps. I can take a faster rush of the speed, a steeper hill. It's all coming at me much, much more intensely. Yet, so you don't want to push too far past your edge. As with anything in life, if you're meditating and if something's happening and it's too strong, you don't want to push too far past your edge. You know how to work our edges and use them as learning. So, and then let them expand what we can work with skillfully. So when you're skiing, that's what happens. It's not an equanimity of feeling. There's a lot going on. But as the stability increases, your ability to not panic, and to have a sense of just centeredness and presence carries through in scarier and scarier situations, but you are at peace on the inside. So that's a good example of when we can come to an inner stability. When the equanimity grows, we actually rest in the equanimity as a refuge. That's one way. There's a few other ways I want to mention about refuge can feel like for us. This is one of the ways. And what happens when that gets strong, we don't have to keep desperately searching or looking, because it's become so powerful. Just the awakeness, the aliveness of the equanimity on its own is capturing, how would I say it? Not capturing, but is filling more of our consciousness, is just the awareness of the fact of the equanimity is there. So it's naturally, I'd say, a force bringing us back to that reliable refuge. And then everything else can happen, but we tend not to get pulled out into it so much. And again, we've talked about this many times, we're not talking about disconnecting or numbing out or being the detached witness. There are yogic traditions I've heard some teachers talk about, and I don't practice in these traditions anymore, but maybe 50 years ago when I was first starting practice, and they would say, they would use terminology like being the detached witness. That actually can probably serve us well sometimes. Maybe we need to be the detached witness sometimes. If the ski slope of your life is too steep, too scary, maybe that could serve us. So I understand what they mean, but it can tend to disconnect us if we can become disassociated in different ways. So we have to be careful about that. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually connecting intimately, profoundly, maybe in ways we hadn't ever been connected within ourselves before or with others before. But having that refuge so alive in us then carries through, and it's an ally and a support that comes in with us. Right? So that's one form of reliable refuge that we talk about. We use the term equanimity. We often also talk about keeping our intentions alive, and that's another way that you can keep your intentions conscious, touching them often, so they can support us when we're getting pulled by things in ways that may not be the directions we want to go in or be pulled in. That's another form, and I'm naming a few of these because at different times in our lives, we can formulate or frame these various refuges in different ways, depending on, we're all different and the times are always different. We're changing, we're all different people. So some people will relate to one way more than another. Another way to think of refuge is when we cultivate, we say, a steady mind. And this is all the work we do. The terms we use are samadhi, concentration, undistracted mind, calm and collected mind, centered, stable. We'll use terms like this. They all have different connotations. They're actually, some of the different connotations aren't exactly the same thing, so it can take a lot of different forms. But this also can be quite a refuge, and we may not feel it or notice it as an equanimity. Our consciousness we all have intentions all the time, but that may not be what's popping out in our intention. It may just be the steady mind itself in the moment that is coming to prominence. And so again, when we strengthen those, we not only want to strengthen them, this is what we'll be talking about on the retreat. We not only want to strengthen these qualities, but we want to be conscious. This is the idea of the theme, finding refuge. How do we keep alive in our consciousness the fact of what does it feel like to have the steady mind? What does it feel like to have it come with us to meet our experience in a conscious way more? And how does that? So all of these, staying alive with your intentions, or maybe it's just a sense of whatever, however we relate to the term equanimity, or this actual experiential of the steady mind. These are not all separate, but they can be separate feelings to different ways to come at it, is the reason I'm mentioning them in different ways. So that's quite a reliable refuge too. If we can strengthen it and make it more alive, it can become to prominence in our awareness, and it comes. And when we realize that we have that steadiness, it's with us. It really is a support and an ally. It's alive. We don't even necessarily have to do anything. It just is. That really can be a relief. It can gladden our hearts and minds. And it can, I know for myself, I remember times when I'm thinking more in meditation, but in life too, where some experience was happening. Maybe I was opening into some new experience, new territory in the map of consciousness, the landscape of consciousness maybe, that was unfamiliar. And it wasn't anything necessarily was going to bad was going to happen, but maybe if something we don't have experience with, we don't know how's it going to be. How am I going to be with this? But because I was so connected with the stability, and I could feel it coming, is just so alive in my consciousness, it gave me not an arrogance. We want to. That's hubris if we think nothing. We're liable to get into trouble if we're not careful. But just to feel that I think I can meet whatever might come from the place of how do we feel? It's a wakeful presence, a non-reactive awareness, mindfulness, steadiness. There's a lot of terms we might use. One more way I'll just mention that it may come to prominence for us when we think of refuge is all the qualities of the heart we're developing. Metta, loving kindness, compassion, empathy, the Brahmaviharas, that includes equanimity, but it also includes what we call altruistic happiness or joy or sympathetic joy. There's loving kindness, compassion, and actually feeling happiness at the happiness of another. So all of these qualities of the heart, they too, for those of you who've done these practices, you know how powerful it can be when it's not just a nice feeling and a good idea, but it's blossomed and bloomed, and it's so alive and it's so prominent in our awareness that it carries through. And again, that's a tremendous support. And it's probably will be connected with some steadiness of mind. You could say connected with intention if you want. It can be connected with equanimity, all of these, but we may not be noticing it that way. It may just feel like this beautiful heart's coming to meet whatever happens. And again, then we don't fall into reactivity because of what's happening. It can support us to be present and make good choices, not make matters worse, right? When we need it. One of the things that can happen is, I remember back in my younger days, this is a lot of years ago, some of you know I was a very active rock climber for, maybe 20 years or more. And I was a pretty good climber in my day, and I did a lot of Yosemite, big walls, multi-day climbs. I was a decent climber. And they didn't have gyms back then. Now it's a whole different game. But I remember being up on El Capitan in Yosemite, a multi-day climb, and we were scared. And we knew what we were doing, but it's scary. You're way up there, and sleeping on the vertical face and all this. And when one person would get scared, everyone could be scared, but if one person could meet the situation with a calm, steady assurance, that was all it took, and it would carry everyone through. and we can rely on that. It doesn't take a lot, right? One person can make a huge difference, right? And we can see for ourselves if we could be that person, or maybe there's someone else around when we need it. And maybe if I would get scared, but it'd be someone else who was the rock, the steadiness, and or there would be I would be the one, and that way we could find our way. But I actually remember the first time we tried to climb El Capitan, we got up and it was the spent one night, and the second day we're going up, and I turned to my partner and I said, I don't like this. He says, I don't like it either. I'm scared. I'm scared too. What do you think we're going to do? I don't know. I think we should go down. Yeah, let's go down. Next thing you know, we're just rappelling off. It just happened. It was almost like you wake up and you're on the ground again going, what happened? Because we didn't have that one reliable refuge. Maybe it was a good idea to come down if you know you need to have some steadiness and presence so you don't make mistakes and things like that. But it really struck me thinking back to those times. I haven't thought about that for many years, but it really is true. So to me, that's really good news, because if we want to do as the Buddha offered and make ourselves a light, a lamp or a light, he didn't explain what he meant. He actually used the word in Pali, Deepa, which has two meanings: is to make yourself an island and make yourself a light, a lamp or a light. I think both work, and they both are quite beautiful, but I think that they work best when we bring both meanings together. I don't know what, I'm guessing the Buddha had one particular meaning, we don't know. To be an island is what we're talking about here. We're connected with our inner refuge. We're not just completely at the effect of what's going on around us. So we have that inner stability. That's like an island, but it's not disconnected. And so if you bring into that then this idea of being a light that shines its light out, shows the way, right? Brings the light for others, then we can come from that place of maybe it's like the island, or bringing that refuge out. And it allows us then the opportunity when needed, if we can have that inner resources and presence, to be a support and really make a difference for others. So I think that's really good news. One person can have a great effect, but also we can be open to it that if we're having a hard time, doesn't mean everybody else, a lot of others could have a hard time with us. We just need to find the one person or the one thing or the one quality, the one inner resource in ourselves, and it's enough. And so thinking of it in some of these ways about, well, what are the qualities I'm cultivating in my Dharma practice? Which are the ones are most accessible to me in this moment? It's not always the same. Sometimes it's the qualities of the heart. Sometimes it might be compassion if we're suffering, the self-compassion, the self-empathy, without judging ourselves, but allowing ourselves to be and have our experience. That sense of allowing, bringing the same kindness and acceptance, empathy towards ourselves that we would towards another, can if we can find the way, and oftentimes we can, to bring those same qualities to meet ourselves, we turn it back into ourselves, and it can be a great support. So the important thing to me of all this is that we want to keep in mind, because what happens is if we lose touch and we lose our mindfulness, say, and we go on what I call automatic pilot. I think you probably all know what I mean by that phrase. You know, you'll hear people say when they lose their mindfulness and they get caught up in things, oftentimes people will say we go unconscious. It's a perfectly fine way to articulate it. I don't use it myself because we're not unconscious, we're conscious. But we don't know what's happening in the moment. We're caught up in things, we're entangled. So to me, I call it just going on automatic pilot. Then hopefully we've cultivated enough of these qualities when even though we've lost our conscious awareness of what's happening and we're caught, we've reconditioned the difficult patterns in ourselves to meet the situation in a better way. But also through our practices, it's true, right, that more and more of the time, these beautiful qualities, these important qualities we're developing, are more alive and accessible, and we can remember more. To like, we start to get caught, and it's like, oh wait, hang on, where's my checklist of possible reliable refuges? Let me go on that YouTube talk that Shankman gave a few nights ago. Quick, look it up. Get to and bring them to mind, and then try them on. Really stop and go. I know how to do this. At least more and more of the time. It's not that we're going to be perfect and never get caught. But we also, every one of us here, as senior experienced practitioners, we've been through things. We know how to suffer and we know how to work with it. We also know how to get caught too, so we know it all. But I think we can keep that in mind to be a great, like I say, a great ally and support.